So profanity, okay? I can
Are
totally.
you asking if that's okay with me?
Yeah. Yeah. Are you cool with like if we?
I'm a New Yorker. Are you fucking kidding me? This is New York Times best-selling author David Mack, and this is Beyond Trek Podcast.
Red alert.
Daughter made a mess at my station here. All these frickin' snacks.
Too many nachos. His kid's nickname.
I remember once when John Ordover and we had like a radio thing we did about Trek. I'm trying to remember. It was like one of the early internet radio things. We got into the studio one day and our guest sat down and he kind of recoiled from the shelf in front of the mic. He said, "It's all sticky." He says, I think somebody spilled juice all over it. I said, "Oh, sure. Blame the juice." Everybody always blames the juice. What did the juice ever do to you?
Spoiler alert, spoiler alert, spoiler alert.
So with us in our little studio-ish virtual studio today, we have David Mack, author of the third of the Star Trek Coda books. And from what we've heard from the other two authors, he's also the one who organized the whole effort, which is quite exciting.
Well, I didn't organize the whole thing. Dayton Ward and I actually hit upon the idea about the same time, independent of one another.
Oh.
And he was developing his notion for how we might attack this issue. I was developing mine. I felt that, okay, given the realities of the current publishing schedule, one person trying to take this on isn't really realistic. There's only so many publishing slots in the schedule these days, and giving 3 of them to one author for something like this, it would cheese off a lot of people. There's, you got to try to spread the work around, share the love. So I thought also in terms of being able to hit a, 1, 2, 3 successive month release schedule to make it an event, it would have to be pretty quick turnaround, and that spelled multiple authors. So I thought, all right, who would I want to work with on this? Who would be my go-to? Well, Dayton, of course, top of my list, because Dayton and I have collaborated on Star Trek Vanguard, on the Fall miniseries, the Typhon Pack miniseries, SCE. Dayton and I, we go back like almost 20 years as creative partners, so he was at the top of the list. And then James was right up there because James has also been part of Team Vanguard. Dayton, James, and I wrote the 24 novels for Tor Forge back around 2015 to 2017. And again, good working relationship. So I knew that James was coming to New York City for a conference, the International Thriller Writers, and it was over 4th of July weekend. So I said, "Hey, do you have any events that Saturday?" He said, "No, I'm free." So why don't my wife and I swing into Manhattan? We'll pick you up at your hotel. We're going to a barbecue at a friend's place out in Jersey. We'll have some beers, we'll have some brisket, we'll have some burgers, and I'll pitch you this crazy idea of mine. James said, okay. So away we go, off to the barbecue, and after socializing for a bit, we repair to a quiet room, and I make my spiel about how we should bring the Treklit universe to a close now that the continuity and the canon is sort of necessitating a shift in direction. And at first, James wanted nothing to do with it. He goes, "I don't want to do that. Why would I want to do that?" And then I made my case, which really kind of boiled down to, well, we really have 2 choices at this point, or I should say the publisher has 2 choices. They can either abandon the Star Trek literary continuity that we've been working on for 20 years and simply just stop. Leave it where it is, let everything just kind of trail off, and let people wonder what happens next. Or we can do an event, bring it to a close our way, on our terms, and try to make something grand and heroic of it so that it'll feel like, to the readers who've been with us on this journey, either in part or for the last 20 years, that it was building to something, that there was a reason for it. And I said, I really think we should go with the latter. And if the publisher goes with that, James, who would be better to do it than us? If we're not going to do it, who is? And would you really want to miss out on being part of an event like that? And
now, James says that's how you convinced him, because he was about to back out.
Yeah, he'd want to no part of it, but I made the pitch. And he said, damn it, Mac, you're right. Damn you.
Well, once you make the pitch, you know it's going to happen. And that was the same thing that we asked him, that I asked is, do you want to sit back and watch it and then regret later that I could have done a better job, or I could have done this or that? You're going to have that regret from now on. So
Exactly.
you might as well just put yourself in it and do it, which I think was the way you pitched that was the best. Someone's going to do it. Do you want to be there or not?
Yeah, what's really interesting is that he took a version of our discussion and he incorporated it into his novel as, I believe, when one of the characters is trying to persuade another to take part in the mission, which, on its face sounds crazy. We have to, destroy, and this is a spoiler for those of you who maybe have not finished reading book 2, so you can go la la la, I'm not listening to you, Jeffrey, for the next 10 seconds. When the plan is put forth that we have to destroy the Bajoran wormhole by pushing DS9 into it and detonating it in order to stop the incursion into our universe by these entities, one of the party to whom it's being pitched is saying, are you out of your mind? But that's how the pitch is made. It's a version of my and James's discussion translated into story terms, which I found very funny, especially since many of the sort of meta-textual conversations that I had with James, with the editors, with Dayton, and with also Keith DeCandido and Glenn Howman, who were part of that brainstorming session at the barbecue with me and James. A lot of those meta-textual questions got folded into book 3, and you'll see certain characters talking about, how do we know we're making the right decision? What makes it, why should we sacrifice what we have for a timeline we don't even know? Do we know that timeline is going to be better than ours? And the answer, of course, is no, we can't know. Well, then why are we doing it? And so it comes down to philosophical arguments between parties who are essentially in denial about what they have to do. But in the end, if you really dig into it, you realize it's a lot of interrogating the very concept of what we're doing as authors, having to terminate a literary project of 20 years.
Well, what was the other option? Go Star Wars Legends with it?
Yeah, pretty much just abandon it where it is.
Yeah.
Leave everything as it is, and either rebrand it or just put a new name on it, and then simply move on. And then with new works that follow it, adhere to a new continuity, keep it in line with the new canon, and simply just don't address the last 20 years of continuity. That would have been the other way to go. Just say nothing.
Well, speaking only for myself, I think you guys made the right choice by actually addressing it. And I think that the way that you guys addressed it in both books is pretty masterful. The way you guys weave together plot lines from like the Prometheus series of novels, which we now find out Worf is supposed to get captaincy of it because that captain's become an admiral and so forth and so on. It's very impressive. And you guys, even in the second book, managed to weave in some of the more recent stuff in Prime continuity, right? Like bringing California classes into the story, and they're being used as utility ships. Love that. Huge unexpected surprise for me. And you brought in characters from Star Trek Online, right? There is so many little details in these books that show that you guys had a passion for the novel verse and for the rest of the Star Trek verse.
Well, it's kind of a last chance. I think like this our last
Literally.
chance to do it.
Yeah, this is the swan song. I do have a question, David. Outside of the three of you, what other authors did you negotiate with? And if you have to include spoilers for the first 2 books, that's pretty much a done deal by now. But what other authors did you have to be like, hey, I know that you put this character here, but we're doing this project and it's over. So who can we take from you, and do you mind if we kill them?
Well, one of the realities of Star Trek licensed fiction is that none of us who write for it own any of it. And while we sometimes will reach out to an author who's got a continuing gig, like for instance, if Greg writing a TOS novel had wanted to put in a nod to Vanguard, he probably would have checked with me and Dayton and the editor. But if he just wants to pull in a character from another TOS book, he's pretty much at liberty to do so. By the same token, anything that was on the table, any of the toys in the box, were fair game, up to a point. the limits that were drawn for us primarily started with, we have to leave most of Voyager alone. And the reason for that is that Kirsten Beyer has been working very hard for many years to craft an ongoing serialized narrative about the Full Circle fleet, their mission in the Delta Quadrant, and again, spoiler alert for those of you who have not finished reading the last Voyager book, basically leading the fleet out of our galaxy into the intergalactic void on a long journey to another galaxy, which is this sort of hopeful Hail Mary, pass type of thing that they're doing. But in a way, it's kind of a hopeful gesture, and it's this sort of, the launching into a grand adventure whose end most of us won't live to see, but it has to be done. Mm-hmm. And it's very exciting, and it was the note on which Kirsten wanted to resolve her saga. And there were also certain elements of Delta Quadrant species, Delta Quadrant politics, continuity that she used and sort of tied a little bow on and said, and this is done, and this is where we're leaving this. So many of the elements that people for months ahead of our trilogy's release were speculating, oh, they're going to use this. Oh, it must be that. Like, everyone thought for sure, everyone was positive our villain was the Krenim. And I just sat there and laughed, and I'm thinking, we were specifically told, don't touch the Krenim.
Really?
Kirsten is using those. They're integral to her story. Don't mess with it. She's going to.
The Krenim are a fascinating villain, so they would make sense for any sort of time travel, universe collapse plot. The theories made sense, not knowing your limitation.
They made sense, but what they lacked was the inside information that Kirsten was making heavy use of them, and that we had been explicitly told, hands off.
Were they the first choice? If that had not happened,
well, we talked about a lot of options.
Okay.
But for instance, that and most of the Voyager characters were off limits, consequently, because of their departure from the galaxy. And that event occurred significantly earlier in the continuity.
Well, you still got Tuvok, Torres, and Paris, who are all still left behind, essentially.
Right.
So use them
we
well.
Did. And we did in book 2.
They're stealing the Enterprise was one of my favorite beats in the novel, to be honest.
Well, someone's stealing the Enterprise again.
Nobody does a nostalgia hit like James.
Oh man,
he knows how to serve. He knows how to tee him up and knock him out.
It was like beat for beat. It was great.
I don't want to spoil this moment in the book, particularly because of the characters who were on this ship. But when this certain ship made its suicide play to protect so many others, I cried because the person who played the character on that ship is really well endeared in the fandom, and
yes. I actually got to relay tell the story of that particular scene to the wife of that performer.
Oh, that's cool.
Who was very
tell us about that.
Who was very touched by our homage.
Yeah,
I want to hear this.
What, if you
can you give us any details?
Well, we're obviously trying to avoid spoilers. For
right? But
maybe we can get back to that in the spoiler section.
Let's.
That makes sense. That's fair.
I'm certainly intrigued.
Or when we do a post mortem
to come back around.
Books are out.
Yeah, but to come back around.
Make a note. Okay.
What was the question we had right before that?
Now that we're in a rabbit hole, I don't remember how we stepped into it.
It was the question about what if the Krenim were your first choice for the big bad.
Yes.
The time we discussed a lot of potential antagonists. We knew that for the type of story we were doing, which is going to have to deal with the conclusion of a timeline, the conclusion of a fictional universe, and then finding the sort of metatextual allegory to commenting on why in the real world, why are we doing this? We needed a threat that could potentially unravel a timeline. So first we went through the list of godlike entities. Q, Trelane, Calamarain, the Dowd, the Organians, the Metrons, all your favorites. We ruled most of them out for various reasons, some of them for being benevolent, some because they'd been written off. We were told specifically, don't touch Q, leave Q alone. All right, we'll leave Q alone.
Anything said about
that's
the
because
Iconians?
Q is involved in season 2 of Picard.
Right.
And he's playing time travel games and reality games there too.
So we were told, don't touch Q.
Anything about the Iconians? Did they come up?
Iconians have been a dead species for ages. There's the Iconian gateways, but the Iconians as actual players they'd been off the map for a long time. We thought, maybe we bring back the Shaddai from Vanguard and do a final callback. But then we realized that compared to the rest of, like, say, 24th century fiction, Vanguard had kind of a niche readership, and it never really approached the level that, say, the TNG books had. So we were like, well, that would be kind of an obscure callback, from another series, for a non-canon antagonist. But we kept going, and one of the things that we eventually settled on, we said, all right, well, we have to have an antagonist that has time travel capability, space travel capability, and preferably one that would have a reasonable either grudge against our characters and a reason to do this, or a reason of their own which suits their own needs to do such a thing. And I was the one who pitched the Davidians. And I know that some folks have criticized this choice on certain discussion boards and review forums and certain blogs.
But it's perfect.
Well, it is perfect, but the thing is, some of them say, oh, I was expecting, a real big bad. This seems sort of underwhelming. I was never that impressed by the Davidians. To which I say, well, then you didn't really think about what the Davidians represent, did you? Think about it. Sure, we saw, maybe a handful, 3, 4, maybe a half dozen at most in a cave. And Picard takes it out with a torpedo and thinks, well, that's all done. Let's go to the next system, number 1.
Yep,
well,
the weekly episode.
You killed 6 dudes in a cave. You basically fired a Stinger missile, you hit a desert cave, and you think you wiped out Al-Qaeda. What are you, nuts?
They hit a sauna with a missile.
All you've done is put yourself on their radar. Now they know you're out there. Now they're angry. So consider there's probably a whole species of these damn things. And keep in mind what they were doing in Time's Arrow, Part 1 and 2. We're talking about a species that when they're out of phase, they're invisible. At will, they can move across interstellar distances and through time. They can shape change into anything they want. And what do? They feed on fear, pain, and anger, neural energy that they suck out of dying people. They literally eat death. These things are death incarnate. If you're not scared of that, this is a thing that's invisible until it wants to come, then can take any shape. They could be all over the galaxy. They could be at the beginning of time and the end of time. There could be billions, there could be trillions of these things feeding on death everywhere they go, fomenting war, fomenting famine, destruction. What could be more terrifying than that?
So, as someone who didn't like Time's Arrow, I thought that the episode itself was underwhelming for me because the stakes seemed so small. I think the way you guys use the Davidians is far more ingenious than how the authors of Time's Arrow ever did. But I did have a question for you, just based on the whole multiversal nature that we accept Star Trek has, right? Was there ever any thought process as to what would happen? And apologies for Tuvix, my puppy who's whining. Was there any thought process as to if this universe's Davidians, which are consuming other galaxies or other realities, might run into Davidians from another reality that oppose them, like a Davidian versus Davidian kind of conflict, or are all Davidians from the same reality, essentially?
It didn't really come up. What we were dealing with here was simply the premise that we have this branch, this sub-branch of time and reality that our characters inhabit. And because of specific circumstances that obtain in that branch of reality, it has created conditions that the Davidians were sensitive to and saw an opportunity to exploit. Now, normally, the Davidians, terrifying as they are and widespread as they probably are, mostly they are scavengers. Mostly they lurk along the fringes, they take targets of opportunity. They tend not to trigger mass events, but they lurk along their periphery, along their fringes, to sort of enjoy the buffet. But mostly they don't try to alter time. They don't try to alter history. They're not interested in altering the course of events, merely in taking advantage of its flow and finding the moments of mass carnage, and then like cockroaches or other insects or other, bottom feeders, they glom onto it, they feast, and then when it's over, they go away. Now, that's how they normally operate. Mm-hmm. But then, if you create a system where if you damage their ecosystem in a way that they perceive A, the damage, and then B, are smart enough to realize, well, wait a minute, we could exploit this. We could feed much greater numbers, grow our species, and increase our power. And suddenly, Bob's your uncle. Suddenly, all bets are off, and the Davidians have evolved into this threat that they were never going to evolve into in the Prime universe. But once you disturb the core conditions by which they live, they evolve and react and become something that they were not meant to be. Something, essentially, they become like a virus that kills the host. And it's in there's plenty of examples of this in nature. Human beings right now on Earth are a pretty good example of this. The virus does really well. It propagates, it expands, but eventually it kills its host and it dies off with it. But in the meantime, boy, is it eating well.
Oh, yes. And so there was a question that I had about that. And one, never saw the Davidians coming from a mile away. But when it happened, it made perfect sense. But as I was reading that first book, I kept thinking, who could these be? What could be used? I thought it was going to be like a completely just different made up thing. And then when it was the Davidians, it sounded, oh, that's perfect. And so now what it pulls into, and you kind of mentioned that, was the actions that Picard triggered unknowingly, thinking, okay, well, these are the last 6 members of the species, bomb them, and then we're done with that. So I guess is that response, and if it's something that you can't address because it might be coming up, whatnot, but was there any discussion or touch on of his responsibility to really, is he responsible for causing this whole thing? Because the
escalation of Davidian involvements, I guess.
Right. If they had been left alone, they probably would not have done anything. But, he kicked down the wall that the cockroaches were hiding in, and now they're pissed.
I don't know that we go into that. That's not really one of the core themes. And that's actually not the instigating incident that basically screws up the ecosystem. That's the sort of thing that the Davidians would probably just learn to deal with. Like, all right, somebody blew up one of our caves. We lost a few people. That happens. Well, just
it's the doomsday machine, right? That's what instigates things? No, it's not that time travel doom. Okay.
No.
Has it been revealed what it is?
No.
Okay, cool.
That's coming in book 3.
No, never mind. I won't poke.
Going into book 3, our characters are still trying to figure out how to save their universe. Book 3 is when, in the pursuit of that information, the first thing they come across is, how did this happen in the first place? Why is it happening? That is the first big revelation of book 3.
Gotcha.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but
you're wrong.
I probably am.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Really, if I understood it from, because I've got the audiobook and listened to the first 2, that they came to the conclusion that they're not even in the Prime timeline, that they're not on that main branch, that they're.
I don't recall that being said in books 1 or 2.
Maybe I misunderstood. I thought that there was a thought that
was specifically said in books 1 or 2.
I think it's more of a realization that they may not be the Prime, that there is not such a thing as a Prime. Every timeline is kind of even.
You're right. That's what I meant. Like they thought that they may not be because of all these.
Well, there is no one.
Right.
I mean, it's a multiverse.
Right.
Okay.
But they're just trying to assess, essentially, again, these are issues that will be conclusively addressed in the beginning of book 3.
Excellent.
Book 3 is split into basically a prologue or prelude, 3 parts, and an epilogue known as a grace note. And it is in part 1 that we will address these questions.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
So I have a couple things that I noticed in James's book most recently. He had several sections where he kind of listed off a laundry list of temporally relevant phenomena or events or things, right? And I tried to look them up because I'm a nerd. I was on a flight when I first read them, so I couldn't read them then. But I took notes, and then I looked them up when I got on the ground. And some of these I couldn't find anywhere on Memory Beta or anything else. Things like the Cassandra Array or the Pharoid Chamber or Tualoli 4 or the Janus Gates. Do any of these have any sort of sourcing in other books, or are they just made up to thicken up the list of things that the temporal Department of Temporal Investigations is like in control of.
I'd have to ask James. I know the Janus Gate was a Star Trek novel.
Yeah, but I don't remember it having anything to do with time travel though.
Well, I mean, it could be multi-dimensional portals type thing. Anything that allows moving between dimensions. I mean, anything that lets you get to the mirror universe, for instance, would be considered an interdimensional portal. So they're probably looking for anything like that.
Yeah,
the
his
idea
list
is
was
that
great.
the Davidians, part of what they're doing is they prime, prep a universe for the buffet. Is they take away its ability to self-correct, self-repair, detect threats, or go back in time and alter the situation. So they're targeting temporal artifacts, temporal and interdimensional portals, anything that their targets could use to protect themselves, get early identification of the threat, or negate the threat by being able to move through time and oppose the Davidians. The Davidians are taking away those opportunities. That's part of their opening salvo. That's why we opened book 1 with the death of the Guardian of Forever.
Which was terrifying, mind you.
Yes.
Opened up big. So this is what I'm trying to wrap my head around. It's an existential crisis. Okay, so we have multiple timelines across multiple universes. With the mirror universe.
Well, timeline universe, pretty much.
Okay, one universe, different timelines.
Multiple universes.
Multiple universes, different timelines in every one.
So does the mirror universe is just one of those, or does the mirror universe have its whole separate set?
Well, my explanation may not end up comporting perfectly with canon, although there are ways to reconcile what I do in book 3 with what Discovery ended up doing in season 3. They established some details about the mirror universe in season 3 of Discovery at a point after my book was written. And although at first those details don't seem to mesh, I can retroactively explain them later, but I don't want to get too deep into it now.
Got you.
Yep.
But there is a specific explanation. And after book 3 is out and people have had a chance to read it, I actually have this really complicated graphic that I created for the use of me and James and Dayton, and also for the licensing team and the editors, so that we could see a visual representation of all the timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly bullshit that was going on to build this story, explaining where everybody was, how we got from A to B to C to D to J to M to L, etc., going around and around and around. And it's all color-coded, and there's arrows and circles and little diagrams. Anyway, I'll share that thing after book 3 has had a chance to get out there. I don't want to spoil people on that.
That's
either.
so cool.
I would love to see that.
Yeah.
Big spoilers in that graphic for book 3. But one of the things that we specifically explain is the relationship between the universe that our characters inhabit and the mirror universe that they have encountered multiple times in the Star Trek novels of the interconnected continuity over the last 20 years. Because, I sort of took an approach to the mirror universe, which was a little different from the way, say, some of the show writers did and some of my fellow tie-in writers did. I approached it from a point of view of, it doesn't have to be this way. This is how they ended up. That doesn't mean this is how they have to remain. That there are possibilities, that the struggle for good, the whole reason they've come into contact with our heroes, is to give them a shot at something better. And so I basically, instead of making it into just a big farcical opportunity to dress people up in slutty outfits and, have mass carnage for no reason, I chose to interrogate the concept of what if their lives are just different potentials, and what if somebody tried to steer them on a nobler path? What then? And so we have stories like, Saturn's Children, which I wrote as Sarah Shaw, which is the Terran Rebellion struggling to find its feet. And then I followed that with Rise Like Lions, which follows the Mirror Universe anthology Shards and Shadows, where I wrote a short story about Kalar working with Barclay as Memory Omega field agents. Memory Omega being the secret organization that Emperor Spock put together. Basically, it's the Star Trek Mirror Universe version of Foundation. And I set up Spock as Harry Seldon.
That's awesome.
Well, You basically are saying that you wanted to take the premise of Mirror Mirror itself, right? Where if Spock was convinced by Kirk to do better, the Empire could be reformed and be better, right? So you expanded it. Right.
But then we have crossover on DS9, which tells us that Spock's empire fell, was conquered by the Cardassian-Klingon alliance, the Terran people and its subjects enslaved, etc., etc. And I thought, well, this seems rather disrespectful to Spock and the whole notion of democracy, self-rule, freedom. The whole purpose of my novel, Sorrows of Empire, was to sort of explain the rise and fall of Emperor Spock, the fall of the Terran Empire. And then you find out this is, again, borrowing heavily from Asimov's Foundation. It's all part of a very long chess game in which Spock has realized that you can't just give freedom to people. They don't appreciate it when it's simply given, although it has to be the starting gambit. It's only after freedom is tasted and then violently taken away that the people will fight to get it back. They've never known it up to this point, at least not the generations who are alive in the Terran sphere of influence. So he creates a situation where their opponents have to take it away from them. In the Sorrows of Empire, near the end of the book, he has deliberately engineered a situation where he's going to be overthrown, and at the heart of the story there's also the sort of bittersweet romance between him and Marlena. He basically winds up taking the captain's woman for his own because she knows about the Tantalus device, so he has to sort of keep her as inner circle, and they have sort of a whole story that spans decades. And then in the end of that story, again, spoilers, the two of them basically die together. They've been captured. They're in the console hall. Empress Marlena, or actually Consul and Consul's wife Marlena, Spock and Marlena are on their knees. The Cardassians are saying, "Do you have any last words?" And Spock says, "With the fall of my republic, with the fall of my civilization begins the fall of your own. Tyranny cannot prevail." And the last line of that chapter is, as the flash of the disruptor turned his universe white, Spock knew that he had won. Basically, he knew the moment you pull that trigger on me, you're done. It means I win.
I mean, that definitely seems like a Harry Seldon kind of move.
Yeah, it does.
Very Harry Seldon. Basically, Spock knows the moment they execute me, I win. It'll take 100 years or more, but I'll win.
That's amazing.
The way that you talk about that kind of makes a bit more sense of how, spoiler, of how Spock finds the Aventine in that nebula. He's just, and so when somebody comments like, "You just figured it out," and Spock's like, "Yeah."
Yes.
Right, yeah.
And they went, all right.
Yeah, we just. All right, we're moving forward. We don't have time to figure this out. It's cool. Let's go.
All of Starfleet is looking for the ship, and you're just going to find it? Yes.
Spock. Yeah, we should suspend disbelief on Spock.
Yeah. So that was how I approached the Mirror Universe. So I've got this whole Foundation storyline running that carries into the 24th century. And I basically picked up the ball of the Terran rebellion, turned it into the Terran Revolution in my novel Rise Like Lions, which is essentially the story of the Terran Revolution and how they basically free themselves and establish a new entity known as the Galactic Commonwealth. A bit grandiose in name, but they have ambition. They're trying.
Any reference to Andromeda on that one's their systems Commonwealth?
No, I mean, Commonwealth is just a...
Sure.
I mean, I come from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Sure, but...
Virginia Commonwealth. It's a
pretty
standard word.
Okay.
Kentucky's not a state. It's a Commonwealth.
Well...
Do you know that?
Now I do.
Yeah, there
Anyway,
you go.
so we have the Galactic Commonwealth, and then we revisit that vision of the Mirror Universe to see how it's progressing in my Section 31 novel, Disavowed, which is essentially Bashir acting as an agent of Section 31 alongside Serena Douglas. They have to stop the Breen from stealing Galactic Commonwealth wormhole jump ships. They're trying to steal that technology. And then, this is a fun bit, I always love doing this. In 2012, I had the Cold Equations trilogy come out. In the middle book, Silent Weapons, it turns out that this whole grandiose scheme and the assassination attempt on the Federation president, all this other crazy crap that's going on, is all just meant to be chaff to keep everybody looking way away while the Breen are trying to salvage the wreck of a wormhole jump ship that they found crashed on a planet technically in Federation-controlled space. And they're trying to do a Sub Rosa recovery operation. So they create all this havoc everywhere else so that nobody's looking here. And they get caught anyway. And of course, the question at the end of the book, it's never answered. Where the hell did this thing come from? Why did it jump over from the other universe? Well, in like 2014 or 15 or something like that, I write Disavowed. And, they go into the mirror universe, and it ends with them trying to hijack this ship. Not only does it jump through space, but because of the sabotage, it ends up accidentally jumping through time. And it becomes the Breen who are trying to steal this thing wind up creating the wreck that set them on the mission to come steal this thing in the first place. And they realize, I am fortune's fool.
Kind of a grandfather's paradox.
I've come full circle in a predestination paradox, and I'm going to my grave. Son of a bitch.
Well, it's the same thing that the Defiant did. The Constitution class Defiant went into another universe, to the mirror universe, and back in time.
Yeah, the interspatial rift. Yeah, back to Enterprise. Yeah.
So you just brought up something that you brought up your Section 31 trilogy, which I remember reading, and I really liked the Control book, and I read it just after watching the Discovery season on it. Right. I know that Dayton has mentioned mentioned during an interview that he'd been talking to Discovery Productions and Picard Productions and Lower Decks Productions. I assume that you also have a good relationship with them and probably knew some of these things in advance somewhat. Okay.
Some of it. I mean, I find some things out from Kirsten. Kirsten and I talk pretty frequently.
So how much, when you were writing Control, were you like, man, I wish Discovery hadn't done X, or I wish they had done Y, because it would have made your story better or easier? Because I do feel like you tell a more interesting story as to the origins of Control.
Dude, look at the copyright dates on the stories. My story, my novel, Section 31 Control, came out in March of 2017.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Right.
It came out years before Discovery.
I was totally...
The reason the Discovery room was aware of the concept is because Kirsten brought it up in the room as an example. They were talking about possibilities, things they might explore, and she mentioned, well, in the books, Dave Mack did this with a Section 31 novel. This was, how he approached it. She thought she was just throwing,
ideas into the
stuff into the mix to go into the meat grinder and come out changed on the other side. And somehow they went, yeah, a malevolent AI named Control that runs Section 31. That's great. And I'm like, yeah, that's mine. That was me.
But because
basically, between that and like at the end of that season, which was I think season 2, there's like a bit where the torpedo gets fired at the ship, and it's lodged through the wall, undetonated, and they send someone to... I'm like, wait, this looks familiar. Where have I seen this gag? I've seen this gag before. Oh yeah, I saw it in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, season 4, episode 8, Starship Down, Starship Down, which I wrote. I'm like, you assholes are doing Dave Mack's greatest hits. Can I get a thank you credit, please? I mean, I know I don't get paid, but could I get a special thanks?
I was literally
Can I get a gift?
Can I get a T-shirt?
Because there's a section in Ashes of Tomorrow where they're like recounting these catastrophes that have happened in the 9 years since Voyager came back. It's how does anybody survive all these freaking catastrophes? But whatever. But, when they're talking about, when we found out Section 31 was run by Control, I was like, no, you can't steal that and do that with that. That doesn't make any sense. And
so, David, my apologies. I read them out of order. I should have read yours first. Then I could have seen how different the two stories were. My bad. I thought that your story was inspired by theirs, not the other way around. So, awesome.
I preceded them by years.
I would have called somebody. I talked to my agent. I said,
no, that's how the licensing works.
The problem is it's owned lock, stock, and barrel by Star Trek. Anything that's in a tie-in novel belongs to Star Trek, and the producers are free to pick and choose and use what they will, without credit, without compensation.
They could have taken you to lunch.
Again, all I'm saying is a special thanks credit. Special thanks to Dave Mack for Control, or send me a T-shirt and a thank you note. I mean, that's really all I'm saying. I don't expect a screen credit. I don't really expect to get paid, but
it's the principle.
A shirt. I created the AI known as Control, and all I got was this lousy T-shirt. That's all I'm saying.
See,
I'm asking for.
I was hoping that it would say Wormhole Death Cannon.
I've got one of those. Actually,
I
oh,
would
nice.
love that
That's a thing?
shirt, if that's a
Oh,
thing.
you kidding me?
On
I
a
got it
shirt?
right over here. Hold on.
Are you guys going to
their
have
new-
merchandise those?
No,
Oh.
we're not allowed legally to merchandise them because they
Why?
have a version of the Star Trek Delta on them.
Got it.
We could probably merchandise the ones that don't have the Delta, but that's half the fun. But basically, we made the Wormhole Death Cannon Intertime Tour 2387.
Beautiful.
We made them as tour shirts. And on the back, they have a list of prominent locations from all three books that are destroyed or otherwise compromised in the course of the story. And there's little gags in there like, Chateau Picard, special all-acoustic show, Start Station Deep Space Nine 2, under renovation or show canceled, things like
It's
this.
merchandising.
Yeah, so
So
we basically made these as a little gag. Originally, it was just going to be the 3 shirts for me, James, and Dayton. Then we realized, well, there were other people who were involved in sort of the creative give and take, without whom this could not have happened. So we ended up making shirts for Dayton's friend and our sometimes collaborator, Kevin Dillmore, who acted as a creative sounding board for Dayton. We made shirts for my buddy Glenn. That's Glenn Howman and Keith R.A. DeCandido, who were part of the brainstorming session with me and James. We made shirts for our editors, Margaret Clark and Ed Schlesinger. And we made one for John Van Sitters, currently the Vice President of Global Brand Development for Star Trek, because he was the licensing guy who sort of looked at the whole thing and approved it and basically told us, swing for the fences, guys, good luck. So the people who encouraged us got the shirts.
Nice. Dag's got a big question, but real quick, I just want to tell you, one of those shirts, or many, are going to end up as bootlegs at a Star Trek convention. Mark my words, Big J said it here, November 13th, 2021.
It'll be really hard. I mean, they might be able to bootleg the front. Basically, if they've seen the logo, they might have pulled some of the art off of, say, Dayton's header on a Facebook page or something. But that's only going to be like the Wormhole Death Cannon name, along with maybe the Delta that I designed to go behind it. That'd be about it. The rest of the shirt, we haven't published photos of it. There's no images out there of the back of the shirt.
Are you guys sure you're not being followed? Have you seen anyone walking
we're
around?
always being followed by CBS snipers.
Camera.
The moment I give a spoiler about something I know about Picard season 2.
There's like a Davidian just hanging out waiting. If you share the shirt design, the timeline changes and I'll eat everybody. So don't.
So, not terribly worried about that, but I've got all the high res files on my drive. So
I had a question.
I don't think it's likely. I mean, someone might make a knockoff version of the shirt once they've had a look at it, get a photo of it, but that's not my problem.
I had a question about like thought processes here. As someone who has been like deeply invested in not just like time travel genres, but like 4D thinking and the science behind that, what kind of collaboration did you and James and Dayton like squish to get the immaculate way that you have weaved this non-linear tale? Because I picked up all those threads and I was right there just following along, and it was fantastic. Very rarely is time travel and nonlinear storytelling done so masterfully.
Yeah. First of all, if you look at the title page of each novel, you'll see that we share story credit across the board on all 3 books. Although Dayton's name is on the cover of book 1, James on book 2, me on book 3. On the title page, you'll see Star Trek Coda, story by, and then it's all 3 of our names.
Right.
And that's because we had to develop the outline together. The only way the editors would take the pitch was if Dayton, James, and I collaborated on all 3 stories, on all 3 outlines, and then submitted it as one big outline, as one document, so that they could read the whole thing and see the full arc of the story in one pass. And so we had to do that, and that involved, circles and arrows and pictures with a paragraph on the back of each one, explaining what each one was to be used as evidence against us. Little Arlo Guthrie for you there. And, I had my charts, I had my diagrams, but mostly what we had was a lot of back and forth. And so even though, I might have my name alone on the cover of book 3, there are going to be elements in there that were suggested by James or by Dayton. And I would go, oh, damn, that's great. I should totally do that. Let me change that. And there will be bits in book 2 or in book 1 that came from me, and so on and so forth, because we weren't selfish. We realized we were a team trying to create a great trilogy. And although each of us would only be responsible for one manuscript, we were jointly responsible for the overall story, for the narrative, for the concept. And so when we would come up with a great bit, I'd go, I've got this great bit, but it doesn't fit my book. It fits your book. How do you feel about this bit? And sometimes they would go, well, it doesn't really work because I want to do this and this. I go, okay, so we do that. Or they'd go, oh, that's awesome. I'll totally take that. Thank you. I'll put that in right here. So, and that was the way it went. It was a very unselfish process. And part of it is that, again, 3 of us have worked together many times before. We're friends. We're all sort of seasoned veterans of this sort of thing at this point. So that it was really seamless, easy teamwork. It was unselfish. It was just, I've got a great idea for your book. Can I pitch it to you? And we would just take it and we'd go. And when it was a good idea, it didn't matter who it came from. It didn't matter who thought it up. A great idea is a great idea. A great story beat is a great story beat. And you just take it. And that was how we built the trilogy. And that's why, even though it's 3 different authors, each of us with our own prose style and our own approach to pacing and structure, it's the reason why the narrative holds together across all 3 books, is that all 3 are a team effort.
Well, you certainly took thinking with portals and turned it into thinking with time portals, because there's a lot of stuff
see that
that
especially
happens.
in book 3.
Yeah, I'm stoked. I can't wait. I'm absolutely giddy about anything time travel. I've got like a handwritten map of all the Terminator timelines on my fridge.
You are going to love my diagram.
Oh my gosh. I can't wait.
Arrows
book
and
3?
wibbly wobbly, oscillating.
Red strings.
Oh, yeah. Basically that whole picture of Mariner with the conspiracy.
Yes, that's what I want.
That was pretty much us during the plotting phase.
When's book 3 out again?
November 30th.
Oh, yes, and I have an Audible credit to use. Yeah.
So
we're going to go into the higher spoiler section now, if I remember correctly. So let's just set that out there. This is where things get red alert. So, all right.
Now is where the stakes really change.
Yep, spoiler alert.
So, David, I asked the same question to both Dayton and to James about like other fictional sources that might have inspired some of your ideas. You've already waxed very eloquently about like Foundation inspiring some of your other works. Is there anything that you can tell me might have inspired some of your ideas for this 3rd book, or anything that you wanted to draw from for this trilogy?
Well, in addition to being a capstone to 20 years of Star Trek literary continuity, for me, book 3 is also an homage to the late Neil Peart of Rush. So one of the key inspirations for the book, for its themes, for its section titles, for some of its imagery, is the lyrics of a song called The Garden, which is the last track on Clockwork Angels, the final studio album by Rush, which I believe was released in 2015. And it was interesting because I was listening to this song, which is basically about reflecting upon your life and what it means and what was really important. And in the end, what is important in life, what lasts and what doesn't. And as I was looking on the themes that are found in the lyrics of The Garden, I found that many of the phrases, many of the turns of phrase are echoed in eerie ways by lines of dialogue in different Star Trek movies, such as Star Trek Insurrection, Star Trek Nemesis, Star Trek Generations. And then, in addition to those echoes, I found that there was an even more poignant echo in a real life source, which was the final words of Leonard Nimoy on Twitter, which was, "Life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory. Live long and prosper." And I saw this thread, this overarching tapestry about the theme of gardens, of memory, and of basically, the intrinsic value of a life. How do you measure a good life versus a bad life? What is the unit of measure? What is the metric? And so I took that as the sort of inspiration. It all started for me with The Garden. As far as other works, I mean, I think where I also drew a ton of inspiration, and this is almost always true for me, is music. I find the music that for me encapsulates the mood, the tone, the pace of a work. And in the case of Oblivion's Gate, the music that I had going most often, except for maybe Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, most of what I was listening to was the soundtracks for seasons 1 and 2 of his Dark Materials.
Oh, that's a great soundtrack. Yeah.
A great soundtrack by Lorne Balfe, probably one of the best composers working today. He did Mission Impossible Fallout soundtrack, which is some of the best action movie music I've ever heard. He did Gemini Man, Terminator Genesis, I think. He's done a lot of great scores. But the stuff that he did specifically for his Dark Materials, he did 2 discs for each of the first 2 seasons. The first he calls a musical anthology, which is where he works out in sort of broad strokes and longer compositions the overall themes, the character themes, story themes that relate to this or that, but are not specifically tied to any scene or any moment or any particular cue. He's just working out the sounds, the melodies. He's working out the musical personality of a season in his anthology. And then you have the season cues, which are the specific cues tied to moments on screen, and you can hear the work that he did in the anthology coming back piece by piece in different ways, different octaves, different tempos, in minor chords, and he just brings it all back together. And the result is that he has some tracks that are both inspiring and heartbreaking at the same time. He has some where he really captures that feeling of terror, that feeling of utter dread that I realized the Davidians must cause just by their mere presence. And so that soundtrack, those 2 soundtracks and their anthology predecessors were also a key inspiration for Oblivion's Gate.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I also, so like I said, I read the second book on a flight, so I just had music playing in my ears the whole time. I ended up finding that I was repeating a single song more than once. It's Time Is Running Out by Muse, just because of that sort of syncopated beat that just kind of like builds on itself a lot, and Madness from Muse as well. And I found that those 2 were like the soundtrack to me reading the book. So
I also found a Spotify
nice
playlist of like more classic rock songs that not only also inspired or captured the mood of book 3 and the trilogy overall, but if you go through them and you listen to them, you find that some of the lyrics in each of the chosen songs serve as either clues to or commentary on the storylines, the character arcs. Basically, there's like little hints are hidden in the lyrics. Like, just to give you an example, the second track or third track, I think, in the list is "Against the Wind" by Bob Seger. And if you listen to it and you really start to think about what it might mean in the context of Coda, you realize that it's essentially the point of view of old man Wesley Crusher, the traveler, reflecting on his life of moving through time and this sort of ongoing mission that's had him in motion for hundreds of years without rest, without stopping. And now he's trying to figure out how to communicate everything he's learned, but he realizes he can't, as they said in book 1, he can't just spill all the beans without screwing up the timeline. So he's got to figure out, how do I leave myself breadcrumbs to help my other self, my other temporal self, get here, but without blowing the whole thing. And I feel like that was captured beautifully in a line in the song, a lyric, which is, deadlines and commitments, what to leave in, what to leave
once
out.
The trilogy's out, I'd love for you to share that Spotify playlist, because I'll just listen to it.
Oh, the playlist is shared. If you go to my, I've shared it multiple times on Facebook, Twitter. If you go to my website, davidmack.pro, from the front page, you can click through to Oblivion's Gate, the detail page about the book. And right there in the middle of the page, there's a link to the Spotify playlist for the inspirational classic rock songs.
Found it.
There's also a link on that page to the reading list or background reading music, which includes all of his Dark Materials along with several others. And it's basically this huge Spotify playlist of mood music and background music from movie soundtracks and TV soundtracks. Put that on and read book 3 and you'll be all set to go.
Thank you. That's what I'm doing.
Sounds... I live with a musician, so I understand the magic that comes with creativity and music in the background. David, we are so thankful that you could be here with us today. We gotta cut it at the time now. If we can, do you have any socials that you want to call out for yourself?
Well, as I said just moments ago, my website is David Mack, M-A-C-K, .pro. From there you can find links to my other social, but the key ones to know are Twitter, David Allen, A-L-A-N, Mac, and you can find me on Facebook at The David Mack.
Nice, love it.
I could have kept this going another hour. Thank you so much, David, for your time.
We could have. You're getting off very lucky, just to let you know.
Well, the best part...
if nobody can gab like me, I could have gone another hour too. But
the best part about this is that, James kind of invited us to do a post-mortem after your book comes out and the hype is kind of there, maybe after Christmas, after New Year's.
Sure.
We can find some time to do all right, full-on spoilers, why did you do this?
That would be excellent.
Once all 3 books are out and people have had a chance
absolutely
to read them.
Yep.
The 6 of us together, that'd be
Dayton
amazing.
And James on, do a little round table.
If we can
get into we get into themes and how we set stuff up, and
the Davidians taking over the universe the way they have in your book is the second biggest threat to 6 men in their late 30s trying to get together at the same time to talk and do anything.
Well, I mean, we're dealing with time zones. That's basically what the Davidians caused by anyways, right? Like, let's blame the Davidians for time zones.
Right. At the very least for daylight savings time.
Oh, man.
Yes.
Well, we can at least lay that one at their feet.
Can we get rid of daylight savings time? Seriously.
Well, now we're on the Beyond Daylight Savings Time podcast.
Legislation. All it requires is a congressional bill.
Right. Good luck on that one.
Audience, thank you so much, truly, for going boldly with Beyond Trek Podcast. Hey everybody, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon and Anchor supporters. Big thanks to Stephanie Baker, S. Tam, Anne Marie, Jim Cook, and Nora Hickson. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for being a part of Beyond Trek Podcast.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your years. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.